What if the asteroid never came? What if the sky stayed clear that day, 66 million years ago, and the ancient ones simply continued? This is not a story about monsters. It never was. This is a story about two kinds of life, separated by deep time, shaped by entirely different forces, learning slowly and imperfectly to share the same world. In another world, everything you know never happened. This is that world. Welcome to Take Two. It began in the cities, because that is where most of us were, and that is where they came first. Between towers of steel and glass, something moved that had no name in any modern language. Something that breathed differently, that left footprints in concrete, that cast shadows the size of buildings. And yet, it waited at intersections. It followed corridors. It seemed, in its own ancient way, to understand that we were here too. The city adapted. Cities always do. New signs appeared, new protocols. Emergency systems were redesigned not for floods or fires, but for something no civil engineer had ever been trained to anticipate. Traffic stopped, streets were rerouted, and the news anchors learned, in time, to pause mid-sentence, glance through the glass behind them, and simply continue. In the subways, in the financial districts, in the quiet hours before dawn, life reorganized itself around a presence it could not remove and could not ignore. Fear was the first response. That is always the first response. But fear, when it meets patience long enough, changes shape. It becomes protocol, then routine, then, for some people, something close to wonder. The veterinarians understood early. You cannot care for something without beginning to know it, and you cannot know it without beginning, in some quiet corner of yourself, to love it. Outside the cities, the relationship took a different form. On the plains and in the valleys, the great herbivores moved with the seasons the way rivers move, without asking permission, without apology, following a logic older than any map. Farmers learned to read that logic, to work within it rather than against it, to plant around migration paths, to share water. And in the mountains, where roads could not reach, the ancient ones became the roads themselves. To earn that trust took years. It was never taken. It was always given, carefully, on terms that the animals themselves seemed to set. And to move alongside one of them, across terrain that would have taken a machine to cross, was not conquest. It was something closer to gratitude. But not all of them came to the edges of human life. Most did not. In the deep jungles, in the river deltas, in the fog-heavy highlands where satellites drifted overhead and researchers moved slowly on foot, the old world continued, largely indifferent to ours. Humans and dinosaurs followed patterns of coexistence that had endured for millions of years. Herds gathered at dusk around water. The ecosystem held its own mathematics, its own balance, its own rules. We were guests in those places. The wisest among us behaved accordingly. Coexistence, though, let this be said clearly, was never simple. There were evacuations, collapses, nights when the fences held and nights when they did not. Some communities retreated underground, managing the surface from screens, monitoring movement from a distance. Some cities built walls not out of hostility, but out of a fear they had not yet learned to outgrow. And in the open spaces between human settlements, something vast and patient waited. Not threatening, not peaceful exactly, but present. Undeniably, permanently present. The balance was fragile. It required constant attention, constant negotiation, constant humility. Then came the questions that science had not prepared us for. Footage emerged that no one could fully explain. Behaviors that seemed too coordinated to be instinct. Patterns in movement that looked, to certain researchers, like something deliberate, like communication. Field notes began to include words that had never appeared in zoological literature before. Words like intention, words like recognition. And on one particular night, documented and disputed in equal measure, a research team reported that a group of adults had gathered in a formation that could only be described as arranged, purposeful, and that under the moonlight, something on their skin had begun to glow. No one has yet agreed on what it meant, but the question it raised has never quite gone away. Are we the only ones on this planet asking questions? The world eventually had to answer that together. Maps were redrawn, not by armies, but by migration routes. International agreements were signed that acknowledged, for the first time in legal language, that the land did not belong only to us. Emergency systems were built around ecosystem balance, the way they had once been built around weather. Delegates sat in summit halls and watched, on live drone feeds, herds the size of small cities crossing continents. And slowly, imperfectly, with enormous disagreement, with failures and reversals and moments of real despair, humanity began to design around life rather than against it. New cities rose with corridors built into their foundations. Parks were not afterthoughts. They were architecture. The old paths were honored in the blueprints. Streets were made wider. Certain blocks were left deliberately empty. It was not idealism. It was engineering. It was survival dressed in something that, from a distance, looked almost like wisdom. And in the ordinary moments, that is where the real story lived. A school group pressed against glass, watching something breathe on the other side. A wedding in the countryside, briefly interrupted by a sound from the hills. Everyone still, everyone calm, everyone listening together. A delivery worker loading cargo at dawn, moving around a presence 10 times his size, exchanging nothing but proximity and a kind of mutual acknowledgement. Small moments, ordinary moments, the kind that don't make the news but make a world. And then there were the other moments, the ones that stayed with people, standing at a window, watching something move through the avenue below, slow and unhurried, belonging entirely to itself, and feeling, not fear, not awe exactly, something older than either. The sense that you are looking at something that was here before you, that will be here after, and that, for this one particular moment, is aware of you in return. From above, the lights of our cities are smaller now, not dimmer, just differently proportioned. Set among the living patterns of something vast and ancient that never left, that was never truly ours to lose. And somewhere in the dark, on a quiet street, under a sky full of stars that watched all of this long before any of us arrived, one of them stops, turns, and looks directly into the camera, still, unhurried, knowing we are not alone on this earth. We never were. Perhaps that was always the point. Subscribe, like, and comment, because there are infinite other versions waiting for you. The next Take 2 drops soon.